The top votes go to more chapters from Alex Anderson's A Ghost of a Chance. So we'll be doing that next. I'm going to be working on that for this video. That's why you're watching it, right? And I'm going to be especially cautious of the audio quality to make sure that I don't inhibit anybody's enjoyment. But then again, if I tend to inhibit your enjoyment, why are you watching this? Then the next on the agenda is going to be the subscriber map. We're going to work on that and try and get a whole bunch of you pinned up on that. I have an unboxing coming too. We're going to have to squeeze that in at some point. I'll film it. We'll see where we get. But it's a different kind of unboxing. Intriguing. It's exciting for me. Maybe not so much for you. Regardless, we'll still let you see what came in the mail. And I better get moving, because this is why I don't get as much done as I expect, because I'm dithering. I've been up for quite a while, and I'm still just sitting here, accomplishing nothing. So, let's get to it. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll give you a sneak peek of the unboxing.
Chapter 11. Tyler had almost reached the town of Ardmore, the small fishing and resort village, according to the tour guide he'd read on the plane, had a population of just over 330 people. From where he was standing, the town appeared to be just one long road with shops and restaurants on both sides. As he surveyed the quiet village, a rustling sound drew his attention to a house just ahead, where he spotted the first person he'd seen on his walk. An old woman was in her front garden, tending to a very large and overflowing hydrangea bush. "That's some bush you have there, ma'am." The old woman laughed, and Tyler turned beet red. I meant the hydrangea. I'm so sorry," Tyler stammered. The old woman chuckled. "I'm Evelyn Connor, young lad, and you just made my day." "Again, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Connor. I didn't mean for that to sound the way it sounded," Tyler said, approaching the woman. "Oh, I knew what you meant. Don't get yourself all up in a tizzy over it. It was fun just the same," she said. "Now, how about my hydrangeas? I bury the fish bones deep in the soil, and the plants really seem to like it. I may need to cut back, though, as they're overtaking my yard." "Oh, I should tell my mother that. She grows them as well, but they have never been lush and huge like yours, ma'am. Are we still talking about my blooms, son?" Mrs. Connor said with a twinkle in her eye. Tyler wasn't sure if he should stay or run for his life. Just when he was thinking about bolting, an old man came out of the house and headed towards them. He took one look at Tyler's crimson face and laughed heartily. "Evie, you have this lad blushing all the blood to his face," he said, grinning at his wife. He was a tall, thin man with gray and white hair. There were about 6 teeth left in his mouth, and his skin was weathered to a leather-like texture. He stuck his hand out to Tyler. "Quinn Connor." Tyler gripped his hand and gave it a shake, almost holding on to it like a lifeline from the frisky old woman who must be this man's wife. "Tyler Logan. I'm staying at the Chance Cottage on Tower Hill." "Aye, I heard that place was haunted," Quinn said, looking toward the cottage. "Is it?" Tyler asked. "What can you tell me about it?" "Well, come on in. Evie'll make us a cup of tea and we can tell you all that we know." He headed toward the house and patted his wife's bottom as she went in ahead of them to get the water on. "Don't mind her. She's just a flirt and gets a kick out of making the young lads blush," Quinn told Tyler in a conspiratorial whisper. "I kind of walked into it, sir." "Ah, well, it's easy to do with that one. I picked a bonny ripe lass, that's for sure." They walked into the house, and Tyler was amazed at how clean and cheery it was. The rooms had white walls, and blue curtains adorned the windows. The hardwood floor was scrubbed to a shine. Even the kitchen table had a bright white tablecloth with blue and yellow flowers embroidered on the edge, with a larger bouquet in the center of the tablecloth. There, in the middle of the table, sat a white milk pitcher, filled with bright blue hydrangeas and pink roses. "Mrs. Connor, your house looks like it should be in one of those decorating or vacation cottage magazines." "Thank you, Tyler. I've always prided myself on having a happy home, from the looks of it, right down into its heart." "And she always has. The kids, the grandkids, everyone likes to be here," Quinn agreed with his wife. Mrs. Connor brought a pot of tea over to the table and set it down. The teapot was wrapped in a knitted yellow and white cozy. She set it down on a trivet and went to fetch the cups. "Are you here on vacation? Are you with family?" Quinn asked. Mrs. Connor put a tray down on the table. It had cups, spoons, cream, sugar, and scones with clotted cream and raspberry preserves. Tyler was pretty sure that the preserves were homemade. The raspberry flavor came through tart and sweet, not the overly sugary processed stuff he got back home. Tyler then found himself telling them his whole story. How he had met and fallen in love with Amy, how he proposed under the stars at the Chinese Lantern Festival, his diagnosis, how she left him at the altar, and why he fled to Ireland. He didn't leave anything out. How he had come here to finish his last book before he had brain surgery to remove the tumors, and how he couldn't do it at home because of the paparazzi. He found it easy to talk to these amiable locals, and not because he wanted information back. They reminded him of his grandparents, and he felt the safety he needed to pour his heart out to him. "My dear lad, what horrible luck you've had as of late," Quinn said while Mrs. Connor patted his hand. "So that's what brought you to the Chance place over by Declan's Tower, aye?" "My parents set it up. I think it might belong to friends of theirs. The minute the Paps start climbing up the fire escape on my building, they were ready to ship me off to Timbuktu. So that's how I ended up in Ireland. I have to say it's beautiful here. I may come back as soon as everything's all sorted out," Tyler told them. "So what is your book about?" Mrs. Connor asked him. "Well, ma'am, it's a ghost story set in Scotland about one of the battlefields there. In my book, the lands are bought out by big developers who want to turn it into a mall, and the ghosts won't have it. So every day there's something happening that either delays the construction or causes one of the key players to flee. The end is going to culminate in an all-out war between the suits and the ghosts. I think ancient Scottish clans have a better chance of winning than a bunch of guys with briefcases, but we'll see. It's the last book in a series, and I want to get it done before the surgery, just in case I can't write after." "Your mom and dad must be worried sick about you," Mrs. Connor said. "Quinn, make sure this lad has our phone number, just in case he needs us." "Yes, Ma. Now, tell us about this cottage of yours. Have you seen the ghosts?" "I don't think so. I mean, I thought I saw something in the mirror this morning, and I've been having some strange dreams about the place," Tyler said before taking a sip of tea. "Interestingly enough, I keep smelling lavender and honeysuckle, even when there aren't any breezes coming into the house." "It could be Lady Chance, the woman in white," Quinn suggested. Tyler laughed. I've been writing ghost-themed horror stories for 10 years. There's always a lady in white. True enough, but Lady Chance is real. How so? Tyler asked, looking skeptical. Well, many people have seen her looking through the window at night. She's standing there, surrounded by white light, her hair a fiery red, with the saddest look on her face. Sometimes you can see her walking in the fields at night, looking for something. Legend says she's looking for her wedding rings. I don't believe that. I think she's looking for something much deeper than that. I think down at the library you can find an article where there was a picture of the actual ghost printed in the paper. Some of those, oh, what are they called, Ma? Paranormal investigators, Mrs. Connor answered. Paranormal investigators, Quinn repeated. They're said to have communicated with her. Not that I understand how they think a bunch of knocks and whistles could be construed as a conversation. Interesting. I'll have to take a look at the library then. So, who is this Lady Chance? Quinn leaned forward and in a near whisper he said, She's the ghost that haunts your cottage and fields, and she's been seen in the cemetery as well. Okay, but who was she before she died? Tyler asked. She was the lady of Chance Cottage, Mrs. Connor added. Tyler began to feel like they were running around in circles, so he started asking more pointed questions. He held back his frustration because the Connors were a sweet old couple and he didn't want to offend them, but the lack of information they were giving him was getting on his nerves. His mother was right. His need for information was both a blessing and a curse. Was she married? Well, she has been referred to as the Lady in White and Lady Chance, so I would assume that she wasn't married, unless, of course, your dreams are a look beyond the veil. Then at least you know she had wee ones. True. I wonder if I can find anything out at the church or registrar's office, Tyler mused. Oh, I bet they have a lot of information for you there. You can look up Chance. And what did you say the children's names were? Thomas and what? Elizabeth. So I would look for Thomas and Elizabeth Chance, Tyler confirmed. Yes, but you might want to try to look for the girl first. If she's the older one and they were Catholic, you'll want to look under baptisms. If they were Protestant, then you would want to look under Thomas's name. I think that's the way it goes. Do Protestant girls get baptized, Quinn? Evie asked her husband. Hell if I know. I'm a Catholic. See, dear, it never changes. The Catholics against the Protestants and vice versa. The English against the Irish. That's how the trouble came to Ireland and why our country got split. Them old fools should have stayed on their side of the pond, Evie pointed out emphatically. Tyler laughed at this and said he should be getting on, as he had a few errands to run and he wanted to pick up a few things for the cottage as well. I would make sure you get back before it's too late, lad. We're going to have a downpour late this afternoon. A cold streak is coming in, too, from the ocean. I'll make sure I do that. Thank you both for all your help. Mrs. Connor, those scones were fantastic. Oh, any time, Tyler. Make sure you come by and fill us in on what you found. Feel free to stop by any time. You're always welcome. We do love having the young ones around, don't we, Quinn? Aye, it reminds me of when I was a sprite lad. Oh, you still are, Evie winked at her husband. Now she's trying to make me blush, he chuckled, and put his arm around his wife as they walked Tyler to the front door. Once outside, he took a deep breath of fresh air and headed down to the road. He turned back and waved at the Connors and was on his way. Tyler's next stop was the library. He wanted to get as much information as he could there. The problem with local ghost stories and legends was that the majority of the story gets lost over the years and is replaced with fabricated information. That's why so many people believe these myths. They were just enough truth in them to make them sound reasonable, plausible, and accurate. Tyler walked into town and stopped at the little cafe. He was still hungry and didn't want to make a pig of himself with Mrs. Connor's scones, so he knew he was still going to stop for breakfast. The cafe was tucked between two stores. One sold the typical tourist trap items, while the other was a high-end Irish linen shop. The cafe was small, with tables crowded together, and fitting 4 people at each table was a stretch. The decor was homey, with small shelves scattered throughout the walls with teacups of various sizes and shapes. As with all tourist towns in the area, the cafe was decorated with a sprinkling of shamrocks wherever you looked. He greeted the waitress with a smile and ordered a large cup of coffee and the farmer's breakfast, which had eggs, toast, sausage, potatoes, and bacon. While he waited for his food, he took out his notebook and jotted down what he had learned. He was pretty sure he would end up going to the library first, but he didn't want to make a final decision until he had some coffee and some grease in his system. He wanted to strike up a conversation with the waitress, but she appeared to be overworked and harried. She was polite and efficient, and he liked that. He grabbed a newspaper from a rack by the front door and went back to sitting at the counter. He liked the Irish newspapers. The pictures were more vividly colored, and the first page was so crowded with information that a person could almost get away with just reading that one page. There was nothing about an American writer getting jilted at the altar, thank God, not even in the gossip section. He was thankful that he wasn't international news. He had made a point to not look at any of the tabloids, but with his breakfast just put down in front of him, he couldn't help himself. There was plenty of gossip about his wedding, or lack thereof, but neither he nor Amy could be reached for comment. He was impressed with his family and friends as well as hers, as there was no comment from any of them. If this stayed the case, then he would be old news the next time one of the Kardashians changed lipstick color or Taylor Swift broke up with a boyfriend. There would be a song. We all knew it. Tyler kept looking at and reading the same 3 pieces of information. The bride didn't show up for the wedding. The groom was nowhere to be found, and no one was willing to comment. He laughed into his eggs and got a couple of strange looks from the other patrons. He held up the newspaper and said, "Can you believe what those Brits are up to now?" Surprisingly, he got a few head nods and smiles, and everyone went back to either their food or their conversations. When he had finished, he paid the waitress and left her a tip. Even though it wasn't the custom in Ireland, he felt weird not leaving one. He got up and walked out the door and headed across the street. He saw a small bookstore and wanted to check it out, see if there were any books on the history of the area. Even if he didn't find out what he wanted to know about the Chances in their cottage, he was still inspired to write a book about the ghosts of Ardmore. Perhaps he would start it as soon as he was finished with his Scottish ghost book. He could at least take a few notes and collect some information while he was here. Hopefully, after the surgery, he would be completely inspired to write this story. He might even come back here. The bell on the door tinkled when he opened it, and he stepped inside a very cozy and crowded bookstore. He saw a whole section on the area, from history to where to stay, what to eat, and what to buy. Although Ardmore wasn't a huge tourist hub, he was sure there were plenty of people who were attracted to its rolling hills, ocean beaches, and ancient cemeteries. Amy would have loved it here, he thought to himself, and then with a frown he opened the first book he grabbed and dug in. If he couldn't stop thinking about her, he was going to think about something else. He looked through one book that was based on the political history of the area, then a book based on the local history, and then one on the religious and spiritual history. Within 10 minutes, he had made a pile of books for himself. He brought them over to the counter and set them down. "Someone's interested in the area," the clerk observed, although it came out more like a statement. "Very much so. In fact, I was wondering if you have any books on the myths and legends of the area as well. I'm staying in the Chance Cottage, and I've had more than a couple people tell me it's haunted. So I kind of wanted to check into it. I write ghost stories for a living, so I wanted to do a bit of research," Tyler told him. "What have you written?" the clerk asked. "I'm working on the last book in my Ghosts of Glencoe series. It's set on the battlefield of the Glencoe massacre." The clerk's eyebrows shot up and his mouth dropped open. He whispered, "You're Tyler Logan," with reverence. "That I am, and I'm not supposed to be here, so keep it on the down low, okay? Yes, I read about what happened with your wedding. I'm so sorry, man. You probably dodged a bullet with that one." The comment stung, but Tyler went with it. "From your lips to God's ears, so I came here to avoid the press and their pesky photographers." Your secret's safe with me. Now, you were looking for local legends and myths? I am, Tyler replied, thankful that the clerk had a good sense to change the direction of the conversation. Like I said, I'm staying at the Chance Cottage and was hoping to find more information about it. Well, I surely can help you with that. We have a local writer who wrote a book about haunted cottages in Ardmore. Let me see if I have one in stock. Follow me. I'll show you our myth and legend section, as well as our ghosts and haunting section, while I scare up that book for you. Thanks, Tyler said, and indicated for the man to go first. He followed him through the bookstore, noticing that there were strategically placed nooks along the shelves where people could sit and read, or use a bench to pile up their books for purchase. In one corner he found an overstuffed red chair with an ottoman in front of it, and a small side table with a lamp sat tucked in between the chair and the side of the bookcase. Sitting in the chair was a freckled-faced teenage girl with the newest Sarah J. Maas book in her hand. She didn't even look up when he walked by. Apparently the book had sucked her in, and it wasn't letting go any time soon. At the back of the little store was a kids' section. The area was separated by what looked like the facade of a barn, with a big open doorway and two large square openings on the side, trimmed to look like windows without the glass. Tyler peeked his head inside to see a couple of mothers with their tow-headed children. In the corner, he saw a lovely young mother with a little girl on her lap, their heads bent over a book. He couldn't tell what the book was, but they were both so engaged that they didn't sense him staring at them. He tore his eyes away from the scene and began to look at the books on the shelf marked Ardmore Legends and Myths. There was enough information here to keep him writing for the next 30 years. He'd focused his books in mainly England, Scotland, and Wales. He definitely needed to explore Ireland and Northern Ireland for story ideas. He pulled out 3 books, one of the myths of Ireland, another on the legends of Ireland, and one slim book titled The Myths and Legends of Ardmore. He would add these to his growing pile of books to be bought. He then went over to the ghosts and haunting section and picked out another 4 books to take with him and headed up to the register. The clerk came around the corner with 2 books in hand. One of these should have information that you're looking for, the clerk said. Without even looking at them, he added them to his pile of books, which at this point totaled 12. I'll take all of these, Tyler said. That's great. Let me get them rung up for you, the clerk said with a huge smile. Do you own this bookstore? Tyler asked. No, my dad does, but he's retiring soon and I'm going to take over. So he's been teaching me the ropes. I can run it by myself now, but I make up questions and toss in a mistake or two in each week so he feels needed. He's not ready to give up the reins completely, and this store has always been his dream. That's nice. My dad is an architect. I have no talent in that area. My brother is an FBI agent, so I couldn't do that either. How did you get into writing? The clerk asked. My mother has always been a big reader, so she would bring us to the bookstore as children. My brother Ben got bored within 3 minutes, but I was always fascinated. So many stories about all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. For me, it was better than an amusement park. I've always been a reader. My brother teases me. He says I was born with a bookmark in my hand, Tyler chuckled. Tell him you weren't born with no quitter strip in your hand, the clerk joked as he bagged up Tyler's books. That's funny. I'm totally going to use that on him next time. So how much do I owe you? 157.19 euros, or 184.52 American, the clerk told him. Do you take Visa? Tyler asked, pulling out his wallet. Aye, we do. Here you go, Tyler said, and pulled the bags toward him. Yikes, I wish I had brought my car with me. Can you hold on to these so I can go get it? You're at the Chance place. I can drop them off at lunchtime when I go home. My wife likes to make it for me, and it gives me a chance to see our wee ones. Wow, that would be fantastic. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. The clerk appeared to be thinking and then said, If you don't mind, do you think you could sign a couple of books for the store? That would be no problem at all. Go get them. While the clerk went off to get the books, Tyler pulled out his phone and texted his brother. I'm big in Ireland. A couple of seconds later, he got a text back from his brother. That's what she said. Tyler laughed and put his phone back into his pocket. When the clerk arrived, Tyler spent a few minutes signing books for the man and promised him that he would do a book signing at the store as soon as the press wasn't a problem. Tyler went out the door and walked down through the town. He pulled out his Filofax and looked at the list of things he wanted to get. He would hold off on groceries until he got back to the little market closer to the cottage. He went into one shop and found a set of sheets and another blanket. He stopped at a gift shop and found a beautiful sweater with Irish lace collar and sleeves. He bought it on the spot and had the shop ship it to his mother. He knew she would love it, and it was made from soft Irish wool in the seafoam color she tended to prefer. The collar and cuffs were hand-crocheted Irish lace in an aged cream color. It was something she would have bought for herself if she were here. He went into another shop and found a crystal banker's lamp and decided he had to have it. So he bought it. It would be much better to write by than the kitchen light he was currently using. There was a small alcove in the cottage for a desk and a chair between the bedroom and the living room, but without a window it seemed dark and closed off from the rest of the cottage. Besides that, he liked the vibe in the kitchen. He had his purchases in hand and decided to walk home and drop them off and then take the car to the market. He'd been told by a few people that they were in for a rainy afternoon, and he didn't want to get caught outside when it poured. He walked back past the bookstore and smiled as the clerk looked up and waved at him. Tyler decided that he would definitely do a book signing event at the store soon. He walked past the Connors' cottage and smiled. It was so heartwarming to see Mrs. Connor go from flirting with him until his face was a cheery shade of red to becoming all motherly and nurturing over the course of their tea. He walked past the market and made a mental note to try to talk to the same girl he had spoken with before. What was her name? Oh yeah, Hannah. He wanted to ask her more about the cottage and the area. He looked up at the cottage and thought he saw something white flash by one of the windows. It couldn't be. He laughed at himself and his imagination, but hurried to the front door despite knowing that it was most likely a shadow or a trick of the light. When he stepped inside, he dropped his bags in the kitchen and took a quick look around the cottage. It was empty, as he had suspected. He went back to the kitchen and immediately took his new lamp out and put it on the kitchen table. He plugged it in and turned it on. He smiled. He liked it there and was definitely going to take it with him when he went back home. It was one of those old-fashioned looking desk lamps with the green glass shade and gold hardware. He especially liked the pull string on and off switch, although he didn't quite know why it appealed to him so much. Probably because they were along every table in the library at his alma mater, Emerson College. He dropped his other bags onto the floor beside the chair in the living room and set to work on cleaning the shelves of the fridge that had been soaking in the sink since he left this morning. He got them scrubbed down and set aside to dry, then went to work on the inside of the fridge. In no time it sparkled like new. He fit the shelves back into the fridge and moved the creamer from the cooler to the fridge. For some reason this made him grin. But he felt a headache coming on, so he took a couple of over-the-counter pain capsules with a handful of water from the kitchen sink and headed back out to the market. He felt very optimistic that the ache on the left side of his brain would go away before he got to the market, and it wasn't the stabbing pain he had been getting recently. Chapter 12. Tyler locked up the cottage and jumped into the rental car and headed toward the market. He had two things on his mind: buying food and talking to Hannah. She had told him that his cottage was haunted by what the locals called the White Lady of the cottage, and he wanted to see if she had any more information. Chances are she didn't, but he was hopeful. He walked around the store getting the necessities: meat, fish, chicken, veggies, and, of course, potatoes. He went through the aisles slowly, keeping an eye out for Hannah. Occasionally he would pick up something that he needed, a case of Coke or coffee, but mostly he meandered through the store. His thoughts were everywhere, trying to focus on his shopping list, but also thinking about the ghost that may or may not be haunting his house. He really hoped that his cottage was haunted, and that it wasn't a clear sign that he was losing his mind. Tyler wandered a bit here and there looking for Hannah, and ended up putting a few other things in his cart that he didn't really need, but just thought he would want them later. He figured that he had better get out and home before the storm hit, and he was really in need of a nap. He went over to the deli part of the store and ordered a sandwich with a side of salad. He had decided that he wanted to have a ready-made lunch because he wasn't going to want to cook when he got home. Tyler stopped and leaned against the cart. His fingers went to his temple and he winced. The over-the-counter headache medicine wasn't working, and he began to feel lightheaded and a bit dizzy. He stopped where he was to pull himself together. He opened a bottle of water and took a swig and gave himself a few minutes to keep his stomach from lurching. He hurried to the checkout before he ended up with any other unneeded things and impulse buys. He didn't see Hannah anywhere. As he unloaded his cart, he struck up a conversation with the clerk. "Hey, is Hannah working today?" The clerk looked him up and down and found him lacking. "Why?" "We were talking about something last time I was in here, and I wanted to get her opinion on something." "I can wait." "Aye." He gave Tyler the total and started bagging up his purchases while Tyler pulled out his wallet. After his grocery cart was filled up with shopping bags, he took it outside to see that he had just stepped into the middle of a torrential downpour. By the time he had gotten his bags into the car, he was soaked to the skin. After he started the car, he cranked the heat. Tyler was shivering and miserable. His only saving grace was that his hair was wet and cold, which somehow gave his pounding head some relief. He drove home slowly, unable to see due to the heavy rain and thick fog. Once he arrived, he opened the trunk and tried to grab all the bags at once. He managed to get most of them, but he would still have to make a second trip. He brought the first round of groceries into the house and dropped them onto the floor, and ran out to get the last of it. Once inside, he stripped off his shoes and shirt in what could only be described as one fluid motion. He walked through the house, soaking wet, ripping off clothes as he went. He bent around the bathroom door and grabbed a couple of towels, draping over his head. Then he threw on a pair of sweats and a sweatshirt. Tyler walked into the living room, and once off the carpet and onto the hardwood floor, he started dancing around. "Cold, cold, it's freaking cold," he complained. He had barely gotten the thought out of his mouth when the wood in the fireplace shot into flames, the fire instantly warming the cottage. Tyler stopped where he was and stared at the fireplace. His eyes opened wide, his mouth dropped open, and his expression was one of sheer terror mixed with awe. He backed away from the fireplace. "I'm just going to go into the kitchen. I'm going to ignore that. That didn't just happen. I lit it before I went into the bathroom. I just don't remember doing it. The fire didn't take until I came out. Yeah, that's what it is. Warm and toasty fire courtesy of my brain tumor." He stopped short when he smelled honeysuckle and lavender wafting through the kitchen, and he could have sworn he heard the faint sound of a woman laughing. Tyler shook his head and chalked it up to his brain tumor playing tricks on him. "Man, I need to get this book finished before I go completely crackers," he said while wiping up the floor with a towel. Tyler thought back to when he was a boy and he and his brother would wipe up the small lake they had made on the bathroom floor the same way. He looked out the window to make sure that he did, in fact, close the trunk, and he noticed a couple of bags on the porch from the bookstore. The clerk must have dropped him off while he was in the bathroom, because he didn't remember seeing them there when he came in. Tyler went outside and grabbed the bags and brought them inside. He was relieved to see that not a drop of water had touched the books. Tyler put the groceries away, along with his other purchases, and took his lunch and a Coke over to the coffee table. He turned on a lamp because, even though it was early afternoon, it was dark and the fog seemed to soak up all the daylight. He opened his soda, unwrapped his sandwich, and went into the kitchen to get the books he had bought today. He should be writing, but he convinced himself that turning on the laptop during an Irish downpour wasn't the best idea, even though there wasn't so much as a hint of thunder or lightning. With the rain coming down in buckets, Tyler took a bite of his sandwich. It was almost as good as the ones he got in San Francisco. Chicken with mozzarella, tomatoes, and basil leaves. He should have heated it up to melt the cheese, but he decided he was either too lazy or too hungry to care. After taking another huge bite, he got up to make sure that all the windows were closed tight. He didn't want to have to deal with any more puddles of water on the floor. He sat back down and began looking through the books while he ate. In one of the books, he found some information on how the potato famine affected the families of Ardmore. There were many deaths and many people fled the starvation for America, with far too many not surviving the trip over by ship. The moniker, the coffin ships, was apt in describing the conditions the Irish people endured trying to get to America and a better life. Digging into his computer bag, Tyler kept reading and hoped he would be able to pull out a pencil and a notebook without having to stop. He stuck himself with a sharpened pencil and swore to himself. He laid the book down and pulled a notebook and the offending pencil out of his bag. He moved things around on the coffee table and arranged them just as he did when he was in high school and was about to start his homework. The computer in front of him, set back so that an open book could be on the table in front of it, his notebook to the right, and his writing instruments to the left. He was a creature of habit, and this sight would have made his mother laugh if she were here to see him like this. After grabbing his lunch garbage, he went into the kitchen to throw it away and get himself another Coke. He sat back down and stared at the fire. He knew he hadn't lit it. He thought about it when he first came in, but he was too wet and dripping to go anywhere but straight to the bathroom to change. He examined the fireplace to see if perhaps it was electric after all, and maybe it turned on when the cottage got below a certain temperature. He looked around for a thermometer, but didn't see one. He couldn't look beneath the logs because they were burning. When the fire went out, he would check to see. He didn't see any major modern amenities in the cottage. Even the water tap in the shower had a separate control for hot and cold. He would have to remember to check that out. He pulled out the socks that he had stuck in the pockets of his sweats and put them on. The floor was fully dry now, so he didn't have to worry about them getting damp. Hunkering down, Tyler had 3 books opened up at once. He found some information on the people who lived in the town during the mid-1800s and found that this cottage was owned by a Jasper Alexander Thomas Chance, an Englishman who'd married an Irish woman and had 2 children, a son Thomas and a daughter. He flipped through the pages to find the names of Jasper's wife and daughter, but they were nowhere to be found. He also looked through the history of the village, but didn't find any more references to the Chance family. At least he had the husband's name. He wrote it down and underlined it. A cold chill ran through him, and he got up to get a blanket. The last thing he needed was to get a head cold. With the brain tumor growing inside his head, stuffed up sinuses would be sheer agony. He took all the books and put them into a pile and went from book to book, looking at the index to see if he could find Jasper Chance's name. He found a reference in 2 books. He put the other books aside and moved closer to the fireplace. He was getting chilled, even though it wasn't cold in the cottage. He looked in the first book, a book about local hauntings, and found a mention of the White Lady of the cottage. There were recounts of the sightings and various stories and legends surrounding the White Lady. There was no information about her other than she wears a flowing white gown and has fire-red hair, or that her hair was actually fire. He wrote all this down in his notebook and pulled out the other book. This book had more information about the property. It was owned by an Englishman who leased it to Jasper Chance. Jasper would grow crops on it and send them to England, where he was paid handsomely for the produce. When the troubles hit, he used the money that he had earned and bought the land from the landowner. Then he began to grow his own crops, took on a wife, and they had 2 children. The book talks about he went to America with the children and that his wife passed away before they could make the trip. The land was sold back to the town of Ardmore and used as a rental until someone put in a better offer. Tyler wrote this in his notebook as well. There had to be a way to get the information that he needed, but right now what he wanted to know was the woman's name. He should go into town and talk to someone. Tyler looked outside and decided that going anywhere with the way the rain was coming down wasn't the smartest idea in the world. He went into the kitchen and booted up his computer. He would look up a few things and then get to work. All this reading had given him a headache. While his computer came to life, he heated up a cup of coffee and downed 2 aspirin. Sipping his coffee, Tyler sat at the kitchen table and began to type into his search engine. He looked up the property address and was able to see an aerial view of the cottage. He played with that for a little bit, moving the little yellow man icon and looking at the property from all angles. Then he did a search for Jasper Chance and was able to find his name on one of the Ancestry websites. He made a note in his notebook to sign up for the site so he could look further into this guy's background. Tyler hummed the Mission Impossible tune and chuckled to himself. He then finished up his search, looking up the names of the churches in the area that had been around during the 1800s. This would give him a good start tomorrow. He really needed to write. He was cursing his tumor for keeping him from having the time to explore the story of this cottage and the people who lived and died here. Then he remembered he wouldn't have even been here if not for his tumor. He decided that he had better get to work before his headache got worse, but he made sure to make a note of what he had found out about the cottage and the white lady in the file labeled Book Ideas. Tyler wrote for a solid 3 hours and stopped when he realized that his head was pounding and he was starving. He stood up to stretch and the world spun. He rushed to the sink and threw up, holding onto the countertop as the room continued to spin. He groaned into the sink and turned on the water. Thankful for the thick pipes that were installed in the kitchen way back when, Tyler scooped some water into his mouth to rinse out the taste of bile. He sat on the floor and opened the fridge with one hand and grabbed a bottle of water. After holding it to his forehead for a few minutes, he cracked it open and took a deep gulp. Tyler rested his head on his knees until he could look up without the room being all tilt-a-whirl. He stood up slowly and carefully made his way to the sofa and lay down. He took the bottle and screwed the cap back on tightly and held it to his face. His breath came heavy and his stomach rumbled. He was fighting nausea with everything he had. He knew from getting migraines that if he let himself vomit, the pain would be so much worse. He had 2 rules for surviving these headaches: don't vomit and don't cry. He had already broken one of them. He tried to sit up, but the room once again threatened to spin. It looked to him like the backward twist that you give a top right before you let it go. He groaned and laid back down, closing his eyes. He felt a cold hand on his forehead, decided that he was dead, and didn't bother to open his eyes. He thought about getting up to get one of the painkillers the doctor prescribed for him, but that would require him to open his eyes, and if he did that, then the cool hand that was making his pain bearable would disappear. He somehow knew that it was the hand of the white lady, but in his state he just didn't care. The cold hand smoothed his head, and he found himself dropping off to sleep. Once asleep, he found himself standing in the Victorian age version of the cottage. He stood there, watching the scene before him. The woman was standing in the kitchen, flipping thick slices of pork fat in a metal pan over the fire. The grease splattered, and when the pan was covered in fat, she took the hunk out of the pan and tossed it into a large pot that was hanging from a hook over the fire. She took 3 thick slices of bread and a thin slice and put them in the pan, where they browned and soaked up some of the melted lard. She let each side brown, and then took them off and put them onto plates. Beside each piece, she put a hunk of cheese and a few berries that were left over from the day before. The children were running around in the yard. She stood at the door and called them in. Thomas ran in first and jumped on the stool at the back of the table, and Elizabeth danced in and plunked herself down at the table as well. The third person, whom Tyler thought had to be Jasper, came in as well and grabbed his wife and kissed her hard on the lips. He smiled down at her and told her to sit her bonny ass down to eat. She swatted him away with a giggle and told him that she was getting him a cup of tea and to eat before it got cold. "Are you coming to services with us, Jasp?" she asked. "No, darling. I'm going to go down to Cork and see if I can get some meat to bring back." It's been a long while since we had any meat of substance. I would be delighted for a slab of mutton or a whole fish to cook up for our dinner. I haven't been providing well for my family, have I?" The woman went over to him and wrapped her arm around his neck and leaned her head on his shoulders. "We are in a far better state than most of the village. Look at our children. They are strong and they are healthy. You have worked miracles for us, Jasper. Hopefully I'll be able to bring back something other than a few fish bones and a bucket of lard for you. Children, finish eating and get cleaned up. We have to be on time for services." The woman took the last piece of bread and slathered the last of their butter onto it. She wrapped it in a towel and stuck it inside a leather bag. She put it on the table beside Jasper and whispered, "Something to sustain you during the ride to Cork. I'll be back before nightfall," he said, and leaned down and kissed the woman's cheek. She smiled and walked him to the door, fixed his scarf around his neck, and said, "See that ya are." The woman watched Jasper taking the path down to the main road and called to her children, "Thomas, Elizabeth, we need to hurry." The children ran outside and began to skip down the path and around the bend that would take them to the church. "Aye, my babes are strong," she said to herself as she walked behind her children. They were almost to the main road, which would make walking much easier for her, when she saw Mrs. O'Neill come down from her door. "Mornin' to you, love," the woman said. "Mornin' to you as well," Mrs. O'Neill said. Mrs. O'Neill was a short, plump woman with dark blonde hair held up with a hairpin. Unlike most of the townspeople, her simple shift and apron were still in good condition. The woolen shawl she wore was a dark green and brought out the dark green of her eyes. "Rain went off with your husband to Cork just a bit ago. I am left to attend church by my lonesome." "Not by your lonesome, Nora. You'll sit in our pew with us. You've always been a lovely girl, I thank you. How are you faring for food?" "We used the last of our bread and butter this morning. I still have a large chunk of pig fat and some dandelion greens if you're in need." "We are surviving, which is more than I can say for a lot of them over by the Craigs," Nora said. "Aye, they can find nary a twig to chew on. Hopefully them men will bring us some meat. A good stew would last a few days, with no one leaving the table hungry. I did manage to find a sorry-looking cabbage this morning, but from the looks of it, once cleaned, it wouldn't even feed a baby. We haven't found much of anything either. With the blight, our entire potato crop is gone. I have managed to keep the children strong, but I get so tired, like I'm waking up and wanting to go back to bed, or waking up to go back to bed. Aye, the tiredness has gotten to all of us mothers. It's because we eat so little so that our young can eat. Thankfully, my husband's children are grown and can help with getting us the supplies that we need. These fields used to yield more vegetables and potatoes than we could eat," she said, Tyler leaning in closer to hear her more clearly, as her voice was very soft and wistful. "The potatoes were so plentiful, we would sell them in Galway to the manor houses and pubs. Now our fields are filled with more holes for graves than for crops," the woman said, and crossed herself. Tyler watched and listened, hoping that Nora would say the woman's name. He had to know her name. He followed beside them. They didn't know he was there, but he looked at their faces. Nora was young, probably about 17 or 18. Her hair was dirty blonde and put up into a bun on top of her head, and her eyes were a dark blue. From the conversation, he gathered that she was married but didn't have any small children. Her husband's name was Ryan. He would look them up as well. It was weird being in a dream and knowing that you're in one, but also seeing things from the past in that dream. Was something communicating with him, or was he simply projecting because of the research he had done earlier? He didn't know. He stopped short, realizing that he missed half the conversation due to his own thoughts. Tyler looked up and saw that they were walking down the path to the little white church. He followed them inside. The children took a seat in a pew, followed by their mother and then Nora. The service started with a prayer for the dead, the dying, and for Ireland. The names of those who were buried in the prior week were read off, name after name, along with their age. Molly Mulligan, age 63. Sabian O'Brien, age 6. Tobias Duffy, age 2. And on and on. Tyler wondered how many of them had died of starvation and how many had died of other causes like consumption, accidents, or even murder. He figured that most of them had died from starvation. After the names were read, the priest began to read the Bible, a passage here and a different passage there, each talking of perseverance, of trusting in the Lord. Tyler was surprised that he had heard the same passages read at his church. When the sermon was over, the woman whispered to the children, and they got up and made their way to the front of the church for communion. The woman and Nora followed closely behind. Tyler watched them closely, feeling weird that he wasn't in line to receive the sacraments with them. Once the blessings were done, the women moved to the front of the church by the doors and were greeted by one of the nuns. The sister pressed a towel-wrapped package into each of their hands. Nora bowed to the sister and the children's mother, thanked her, and said a short prayer with her. Tyler stood beside Nora in awe of both women. But all the starvation and all the cruelty of nature and man surrounding them, their faith in the Lord was unwavering. He followed the women out of the church and listened to their conversation as they walked back towards their cottages. There was a widow who lived among them. They talked about bringing her some of their bread. Nora opened hers and saw that she had a full loaf, as did the children's mother. "Here, I'll give her half of our loaf. You need yours to keep your children strong," Nora suggested. "Oh, no. You could find yourself with a child at any moment. I should give her half of mine." Elizabeth, who was listening to their conversation, interrupted them and said, "Why don't each of you give her a quarter of the loaf? That way she'll have half a loaf, and you'll each have a bit more than half a loaf. That's what Papa would say." "What would Papa say?" Thomas asked, then went back to rolling a rock with a long stick he had found on the side of the path. "Papa always says that if everyone gives a wee bit, then everyone has the same," Elizabeth said proudly. "Your father is a very wise man," their mother told her. "Indeed he is," said Nora. The 2 women and 2 children made their way to the widow's cottage and knocked on the door. They heard a shuffling inside, and an old woman opened the door.
Are you filming me?
It's Snapchat.
You're filming
Myself. I'm going to be reading the book today. So I gotta do a little voiceover work, and I'm testing out my microphone. Jasmine, doth thou protest? You say hello? How are you doing? Where's he going? Where is he going? Do you want to go for a swim? You want to go in the pool? Doesn't that look exciting? I had to tear apart my room yesterday, though, to make room for it. And I ended up I emptied out the entire closet again to reorganize so that I could make room for whatever's in that box. I think you can see what it is. But yeah, we'll have a tour later when it's done.